Hi everyone, I'm William Dennis, product manager on GKE Autopilot. So time for something a little bit different. You've been looking at all the hardware just then, which is really great. So what I work on is Kubernetes, which kind of sits on top of all that hardware. So I guess the next 20 minutes, we can talk about how we can actually sort of orchestrate all that amazing technology and actually run applications in our containers on that. So as I mentioned, I'm a product manager. I work on, actually I created GKE Autopilot, which is a new way to use GKE. 4 years ago, I also decided to write a book, which just got published this year, so it took a little while, but these worlds are kind of connected for me. So as an author, what I'm trying to do is sort of teach people how to use Kubernetes, how sort of demystify some of the complexity behind it. And as a product manager on GKE, I'm trying to make it easier to use Kubernetes and use GKE. So very much connected for me. So just real quick, we've only got 20 minutes and I actually want to get to a demo, but, and I should say, please interrupt and ask questions. I really love making these interactive. So please jump in with any questions you have. I'd love to make it a conversation. But just to kind of set the stage, I don't know, maybe quick show of hands. So who's like very familiar with Kubernetes? All right, great. Okay, so let me cover a bit of Kubernetes then. So as you know, essentially when it comes to how to deploy your applications on the cloud, there's essentially a spectrum, and at the bottom you sort of have VMs which have the most flexibility. You can sort of do whatever you want, right? We were just talking about bare metal and hypervisors in the previous session, right? So you can configure that all as much as you want. Then kind of at the top of the spectrum, you have products like Cloud Run, or in the past sort of App Engine, which kind of kickstarted the whole Google Cloud, and these typically have like a much simpler way to operate it, but there might be some compromise in terms of like what you can actually run, like for example, block storage and things like that. Kubernetes sits in the middle of these two. I would sort of say to me it's the kind of the Goldilocks one, right? It's not too kind of abstract, but also not too sort of low level either. It's sort of just right. And we call it a container orchestrator, which is really just a fancy way of saying you have a bunch of workloads, whether they're databases or web apps or whatever. You put them in containers, which is just the modern way to package up applications. And then Kubernetes will sort of help you deploy that to the fleet and kind of manage the VMs for you. So yeah, as I said, Kubernetes kind of sits in the middle. And there's a bunch of workloads that you can run on Kubernetes. So one of the things that people really like about Kubernetes is when you have something like a database, it kind of has all of the building blocks you need to sort of specify that database. Like if you want to run something, high availability across multiple zones for failover and things like that, Kubernetes is not the simplest tool to use, but it has all of those. It has all those building blocks, though, right? And I often kind of advise people to not necessarily focus on sort of making simple tasks simpler, right? But making kind of complex tasks possible. Another way to look at it is like, this is not a hobby for me, right? This is a day job. Like I'm here every day. I'm trying to keep my business running. Give me all the tools I need and all the features I need. So Kubernetes has a lot of tools, a lot of features, and there is a bit to learn. That's kind of why I wrote a book. But yeah, when it comes to things like, just to highlight, I guess, we can sort of highlight four. I mean, you've got the stateless web applications, which we've been doing that for the last 12 plus years with App Engine, Heroku, and all those ones, right? And Kubernetes it has that, but it also has things like you can run MySQL directly on Kubernetes in a fairly simple manner, to be honest. It has a way to represent a batch job. AI is obviously very popular these days, and so one of the batch jobs a lot of people are running are like training workloads. So Kubernetes has a great construct for that. It also has, various other constructs for like running, workloads in every machine. So that's just kind of like a 1 minute intro to Kubernetes.
It doesn't seem to me that Kubernetes is a batch kind of solution. How does that play out in Kubernetes?
Batch?
Yeah, actually, batch jobs, right?
Yeah. No, good point. Actually, some of our biggest workloads are batch. In fact, the biggest workload ever run on Google Cloud, on GKE today at least, was a batch workload. There's a blog post on it. I think like for a brief moment, like we almost had essentially like a parallel, like almost like a supercomputer size workload running on this thing. I can follow up and share the link with you to this blog post. But yeah, we have a lot of batch that runs on Kubernetes. you know, I mean, one of the things with batch, right, is, you know, you want to run the workloads, and you also want to kind of tear it all down at the end. And, you know, I'm about to talk about this, you know, from the Autopilot perspective, but Kubernetes and GKE and Autopilot in particular is very good also at like tearing things down. So it's like, you know, when you run that training workload, you know, on the NVIDIA, you know, H100, which is, you know, like the price of a car like every month, basically, right? You know, you want that to tear down pretty quickly when the workload's finished. And so I think one of the things like Kubernetes does really well. Actually, you can also look at technology like this. You know, Kubernetes, I guess, is a you know, a cluster orchestrator. There's a lot built on top of Kubernetes, like a queue is one of them, right? So queue is sort of makes batch processing even better by kind of taking your limited pool of resources and sort of maximizing the utilization. So actually, yeah, I think it's very applicable. So there's a catch. So a lot of people come to Kubernetes and, you know, they want these API constructs like these ones, right? The job, the stateful set, the databases. But, you know, that's kind of what they come for, but then they end up with a bit more than what they wanted, which is in you know, historically you would have to configure node pools and nodes. And while we help and do a lot to help, there was still a fair bit of configuration at the bottom there. So when I was looking at this problem, I kind of thought the better API would actually just be the one that people came for, right? It was just the Kubernetes part without the rest of it. And because actually it turned out there was another API at the bottom as well. And you basically have Kubernetes as an API. You have the cloud platform, and this is true if you're on one of our competitors as well, where you have to kind of configure worker nodes. Underneath all that was the actual VMs, right? Just in the session prior to mine. Now, for the most part, you didn't have to worry about the VMs. So we often didn't show this one. But when it came to security and, you know, a few other things, well, they are there in the project, and you had to at least be at some level concerned about them. So this is what we tried to do with Autopilot, and what I hope you will agree that we've achieved. And that is, we have actually kind of collapsed that sort of complex diagram that I showed you into this, which is essentially the desired, you know, just the Kubernetes API. And then as far as like the GKE, the kind of the platform component is concerned, we sort of shrank it down to just like a create command. So you just like create the cluster. And then from that point on, you're just using Kubernetes. So yeah, I guess, you know, for those that are not like sort of seeped in Kubernetes day to day, I guess the kind of the TLDR here is, you know, users are coming to Kubernetes for the ease of orchestrating their containers. And, you know, traditionally, the traditional model, the model that you'll see on our competitors as well, is that, you know, there's various other systems they have to manage as well as the thing they wanted. And with Autopilot, we're just trying to give them the thing they want.
So to make sure I'm rocking this, this is a day 2, not just day 1 or 0. This is a day 2 consideration. In traditional solutions, all of the resources that runs my Kubernetes runtime, my workers, would be in the control plane, would be in what Google calls in my project. So it's not that these things were misconfigured or whatever. I, as who I am, will break them. So I will go in there and I'll try and tweak I like the term nerd knobs. Those nerd knobs are basically taken away from me. And now I get as a service Kubernetes.
Exactly, 100%. So in the past, the control plane was fully managed by Google. You just get an API endpoint. But the worker nodes, it was in this, like, it's exactly what you said. It's a shared responsibility model. So Google would create them, Google would upgrade them, Google would even like automatically repair them, but you still have full access, which can be good, but can also be bad.
If it's for me, I'm bad. I will break. Yeah, Alistair will tell you.
I'll have to repair it.
He'll have to repair it. So
right. Yeah. Look, I mean that's what I want for me too. Like, essentially the way I look at it, I want it to be that if it's broken, I want it to be Google's problem. I don't even want the possibility that you know, and I'm thinking, you know, me on the weekend, right, playing with it, but I don't want the possibility that I messed it up, right? If my workload crashes or my workload breaks, great, that's my problem. But if the VM is misbehaving, I want that to be Google's problem, and I don't want this uncertainty around. Was it the knob? What did you call it? The nerd knob? The nerd knob. I like that. I'm going to use that one. Was it the nerd knob that I tweaked, or was it, you know, is it actually Google's fault? And so,
Is Autopilot a separate solution on top of GKE?
It's part of GKE, so we call it like marketing speak. It's like a mode of operation. So it's a way to use GKE.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
do you would people use kube control even under GKE or?
yes, absolutely. So in fact, so on this diagram, you essentially have kube control is sort of how you would interact with Kubernetes components, and then Gcloud is how you set up the nodes. So for example, on Gcloud, you'd be like, Gcloud node pool create, which gives you like 10 nodes, and then kubectl, you'd be like kubectl create, and then the workload resource. So what we get to with Autopilot, it's essentially you get all of kubectl, right? But you don't have to worry about the Gcloud one. And we launched this 3 years ago, by the way, into GA, and at the time, there had been a few attempts at this kind of serverless Kubernetes, so-called serverless Kubernetes, but all of them had kind of compromised, right? They'd be like, well, this is like essentially it's sort of a like App Engine, but with a Kubernetes, sort of front end, in the sense that you couldn't run a database or you couldn't run a batch job, or you couldn't run like GPU workloads. So what we did with Autopilot is we said, okay, we want to give you the full capability of essentially kubectl, the Kubernetes API, just without the management, without the knobs, at that layer. So that's really what we're going for. It's it's an ongoing effort. I've been working on it 3 years now, in public 3 years, longer than that, and we're still building it out. So the creation experience, we also took the advantage of simplifying that. So when I say we shrunk the API surface, essentially you can create a production quality Autopilot cluster. Like literally, you could run a Fortune 500 e-commerce website just by doing this. Give it a name, which is any name you want, right? Pick a region, typically wherever your users are, and pick the networking. Now, if you want, you can just click the create button here, and literally you could run a Fortune 500, Black Friday e-commerce site on this. Now, typically people will be ticking the private cluster option. There might be some networking configuration, but take it from me that cluster is,
where are the containers? Where's the registry? Where's all the other stuff that goes along with this thing?
Yeah. Good question. All right. So the containers, everything's unchanged as it relates to the containers. So this is an example workload in Kubernetes. Don't worry about the YAML here, but essentially this user is requesting the Nginx container, and the way Autopilot works is, all users of Kubernetes of GK have to create these things. What Autopilot does is it takes that specification and then uses that specification to also provision the node resource. So that's the extra thing that we're doing there. And since AI is the kind of flavor, I should spend a bit of time talking about that. So when it comes to accelerator resources and things like that, in the past with other Kubernetes platforms, what you would do is you would create a pool of GPU nodes, right, and then you would run your workload on it. But of course, these things are very expensive, and so you want to make sure only that important workload runs on it, nothing else, right? And so there was a bit of configuration to sort of be like, okay, I want these resources, this workload, but no other workloads, and you sort of had to get everything right. Because Autopilot is just going through the Kubernetes API, what we're actually doing is we're taking this information that you already supplied to us. You already have to do this. We're just taking that information, doing a little bit more with it. We're looking at it and saying, okay, this user here wants an A100 and they want one of them. So we're going to put them on a VM with one A100. Simple as that.
So under the covers, this is provisioning an instance for each of these pods that's deployed.
Exactly.
To match whatever the spec is that I put in here. If I put some resource requirement specs in here for CPU and memory as well.
Exactly.
It'll provision that
That's right.
instance per pod.
That's right. Now, you mentioned like one per pod. It's not always one per pod, but I can happy to go into the details with you offline maybe. There's some nuances there, but more or less exactly that. Yes. Yeah. And of course, TPU as well. So TPU, as you're probably aware, is Google's proprietary accelerators for AI training and inference, and that's fully supported as well, using the same model, right? So the TPU technology gets a little bit complicated because you have to kind of specify like a grid, because we're actually giving you it's literally like a 3D chunk of a server. But again, you just specify it in the workloads and send it off.
And then where GKE fits in here is the actual deployment. I mean, because all this is something you have to do regardless whether you're using GKE or not, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, sorry. So where GKE fits in?
Yeah. So why do I want to go use GKE rather than Kubernetes here?
Got it. So I should say GKE is Google's managed Kubernetes. So you are getting the.
Yeah, I understand the terminology, but I'm trying to understand what the managed service provides me.
Got it. As opposed to just running Kubernetes,
Yeah.
like on Google.
Yeah.
Okay. Great question. So have you ever seen the doc online called Kubernetes the Hard Way? Okay, that would answer your question.
I know.
But basically, so this box here is a managed control plane. It's just an IP that you get with hosting the Kubernetes API. Inside that box, right? If you were to do this yourself, you know, if you want high availability, you need to basically create 3 VMs and run like the Kubernetes software on it. Unfortunately, those VMs need state. They're running like a key value storage system, so you need to have like replicated state on those 3, which of course means you need backups of that state and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot that goes into this control plane. So, you know, however you use GKE, whether it's in autopilot mode or not in autopilot mode, you are getting this thing, you know, fully provided for you. And you know, I would strongly advise like don't run Kubernetes yourself. There is very little added value you get from doing it yourself. We don't see too many customers doing it. I think maybe one or because GKE was also like the first one that launched. So essentially, as long as Kubernetes has existed, almost as long GKE has existed. So I think we only have kind of like one, you know, largish customer that sort of isn't using GKE. I know it's a bit different in other clouds where kind of the managed Kubernetes kind of came along a bit later, and there was perhaps some, you know, perhaps even better tooling to doing it yourself. But again, I would say, you know, wherever you're running it, don't run it yourself.
Yeah, I don't see the much. I love the idea of Kubernetes. Like the first time I've tried to deploy Kubernetes on my own, I'm like, why would anybody ever want to do this? It is just painful. But it's the same argument with hypervisor. Like if I did not grow up in the VMware vSphere environment, I would never want to run vSphere myself. Like I just want VMs. I don't want to manage the control plane.
Right.
So I think it's a similar argument. Why would you ever want to manage the control plane of anything yourself?
Exactly.
And then with Kubernetes in particular, when upgrade time comes around and you start walking through the readmes of what's the dependencies for upgrading all of the other subcomponents to get to the next release, and there's going to be 4 of those a year. Yeah.
I think what we want to get to, though, is where, you know, inside our organization, we are working on policies and consistency and that sort of thing. And we can establish that and use services like this one to automate and instantiate them so that, you know, you're not referring to runbooks all the time and auditing and making sure that they've been followed and all that other sort of stuff. So that applies, you know, in my feeling, to customers of every size. It's just that usually below a certain level, they just don't have the resources or time to do it. And above that level, there's a whole lot of resources wasted on it that could be used for other things.
So, you know, what's interesting is looking at who's been attracted to autopilot at the beginning, right? And we're 3 years in here. What's interesting to me is...
Hang on, I'm just going to say, they always say when I hear these stories from vendors, it's always, we thought that this was going to bring this to the masses, but it turned out that some of the biggest customers we have are the ones who are really excited to use it. Or is that what you're about to say?
Well, actually, like, what's fascinating to me is like, you know, we get a lot of people that don't know much about Kubernetes. They're kind of like, okay, like we need Kubernetes.
That's the whole world.
But we don't want to become experts. Like, you know, there are some companies that are literally hiring Kubernetes maintainers, right? But that only goes so far, right? So, you know, unsurprisingly, we got a lot of people, you know, who are like, you know, we want Kubernetes, we don't want all the hassle of managing it, right? What's interesting to me is that we also actually are getting the more sophisticated users, right, at the kind of top end that are like, oh yeah, we know enough to know we don't want that stuff, right? Yeah. So, you know, actually, like, you know, what I want to do is, you know, sort of spread it, you know, more towards the middle, right? And to say, you know, it's a good idea to give up, you know, as the gentleman said, like the nerd knobs, right? It's actually going to be good to to give up some of those things and move to a better like day two posture. Now, I promised a demo, and
Can I have
yeah.
a quick one just to so make sense out of it? So Autopilot is essentially just the way how to deploy GKE. So I can still deploy GKE sort of like old school way.
Exactly.
So I can have all these knobs, and do it my way.
Exactly.
Okay. And
yes.
so how much the Autopilot I'm trying to find out the use cases. So how much Autopilot will do for me, because sometimes I don't want that, right? Sometimes I need the flexibility.
Yeah.
Let's say I wanna install like my own storage solution for the Kubernetes clusters,
Right.
service mesh. So is the Autopilot will install the service mesh for me, storage, how far is it gonna guide me?
So like I'll just tell you the goal. The goal from the product side is to give you the full Kubernetes API.
Okay.
And more or less, we have actually achieved that goal now. Like 3 years ago at launch, there were some gaps, but I would say, basically we have done that. So when you talk about like service mesh, yes, because that is operating at the Kubernetes layer, you can install your service mesh. You can install, open source Istio, Linkerd, or anything like that. When it comes to storage solutions, I'm not aware of a storage solution that doesn't work in autopilot mode. So basically, yeah. Because we're giving you the full Kubernetes API, anything you can do with that API is supported. Now, there is a catch, and I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Like any managed product, the trade is, and this is not new to Autopilot, right? This is since day dot of cloud. If you want a more managed product, you need to kind of give up some of that like root admin access, right? So there are certain workloads that will not run in Autopilot mode due to that trade-off, right?
Okay.
The fact that you are trading off that privileged access. I would say for the most part, it's a good thing, right? Principle of least privilege. Don't give me tools I don't need. If you can give me everything that allows me to run my workload without those sort of more dangerous tools, then it's better.
Okay. So it's good to keep being aware that there are trade-offs.
Yeah, there is definitely a trade-off by moving to a managed product. Just the same, I guess, as like when you go to GKE as a whole and get the managed control plane, there's a trade-off there too. You can't tweak certain things on the control plane.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same trade-off. The good thing is Autopilot has matured a lot in the last 3 years. So when we launched, we didn't have any support for partners. So, Datadog, for example, Twistlock, Aqua Security, these ones, and many others, because they all require administrative privileges to run, to do security scans and things like that, those products didn't work. You could run them in the container, right, inside the container, but not on the node. And actually, one of our competitors, that's the only way you can do it. It's in the container. About 6 months after launch, though, we did actually, create a certified partner program. So now you can run all those workloads. So, this is a line that, is a little blurry, and we're constantly looking at it and trying to kind of essentially give you as much control as possible without compromising the whole point of the product, which is that we are managing stuff for you. And I guess the red line is, if every user has SSH access with root and can do whatever they want, then we can't really manage the nodes anymore. We can't manage the compute because, when something breaks, we're like, well, we don't know what happened.
Okay.
And essentially, but it is an ongoing conversation essentially that we're having, and we are looking at some features to even further open it up a bit more.
Okay.
But I guess TLDR, you can run all workloads that just use the Kubernetes API you can run. But anything that wants the Kubernetes API sort of plus Linux privileges, because it's sort of making assumptions about the operating system and stuff like that. In that, you may need to, at the moment, go through our partner program. If you're a partner like one of ours, like a Datadog, for example.
I assumed Autopilot was merely a solution for auto scaling of the pods and controller and containers and stuff like that. Does it do more than just that, or
it's more than that? I would say it's more about the managed compute. It's more about
But isn't JKE in general all about the managed compute and the control plane and all that?
Yeah. The control plane, yes, but with the traditional GKE, you'd need to do. There are two differences to Autopilot. So the two differences are, firstly, you need to define and create your nodes. So, for example, with the A100, you need to create a node pool of A100s. And we do have auto scaling and things like that to help. But at the end of the day, you would still need to define these things. And the other thing is the sort of management and operation of those nodes is on a shared responsibility model. What that means is Google offers support, but if the software on that node breaks, then there is a shared responsibility with the customer. So for example, on a support ticket, we may actually have to instruct the user how to SSH into that node and run some commands, right? Whereas in autopilot mode, there is no SSH access, which is, I would posit, a good thing, because it means that we're on the hook for fixing everything, right? Which is, I think, where we should be. Does that explain it? I can follow up offline.
No,
if you want
no.
to dig in.
Autopilot eliminates SSH. It will not allow SSH access to the nodes.
That is right.
Yeah.
Just like if you think about like
I wonder why. My pushback, and we can talk about it in the break, is why would you want it? Like, I don't want to SSH. Like, we're in this new movement of serverless that you shouldn't be SSHing as a customer at all. Like, why would you want to do it?
Jeez. Nah.
Well,
We can talk about it offline, but
Ouch.
I'm really.
hurts.
So I personally, like, why would you want to have administrative rights to the control plane?
From my
At all.
cold dead fingers.
yeah. So
Oh man.
so there are cases, and maybe you're seeing them as corner cases, but I see them as they can be really significant and core to an organization's function, a company's function, where you need to do that kind of tuning. And that's where you pay for it, buy it, maybe own it, meaning the individuals who know how to do it. But if what you're saying is 90% of a typical application estate doesn't really need any of this, I'm with you. I'm completely with you. So you know, we have the folks here who, no, these are folks with the tire tracks on their backs from problems because of trusting a managed service of some kind or other. But I would say that you know, every bad experience is worth 20 good experiences in life, and so you need all the good experiences to erase the concern about not having that level of control.
Well, I would say what I'm struggling with here is, you know, every time we go for a managed service, okay, we know we don't want to fully tweak everything in Kubernetes, so we're going to go with the Kubernetes managed service. What I'm struggling with is figuring out what's the difference, how much more am I giving up to go to autopilot, and how do I tell if that's going to work for my deploy? So you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying 90% or a very large percentage of managed Kubernetes customers should be using autopilot. Okay, so now my question back to you is, what's the 2 or 3 questions that if I answer yes, I'm not a candidate?
So if you really want to customize the node, so if you're not happy with how the node looks like from Google and you really want to get in there and customize it, then it's not for you. So for example, I had one customer, they're a game company. They want to create like a shared, like mounted, like RAM disk that like every container can access. That's kind of like a pretty major modification to the node that we don't offer, that we don't support. It's not part of the product. That would be a good reason not to use it. The other reason traditionally has been, you know, so let me just tell you, I guess, like, you know, it's great to hear this, by the way, and I'm obviously on this camp, but you know, definitely respect you.
Well, I'm potentially on that camp, but you got to be very careful
I
with
get
each level of control you give up, and I want to know what the line, how to tell if I'm crossing that line.
Very much respect the point of view too of, you know, you can take the SSH access from my cold dead hands. Like, I get it. I get where that comes from. You know, one thing that we hear from a lot of users is they often have like 1 or 2 privileged workloads that they want to run, right? Like, so actually, what they typically don't want, particularly if you have, you know, let's say 500 developers at a big company and, you know, a small platform team, typically the platform team doesn't want all 500 developers having just carte blanche on everything.
Right.
But they may need like the one, you know, blessed admin workload, you know, and we had the partner program for Twistlock and Datadog and Acro and stuff like that, but they might have their own essential, like, you know, it's like Williams Twistlock, you know what I mean? So that is traditionally a reason not to use autopilot as well. You know, I can talk about it offline, I guess, but we are looking at some solutions there to further satisfy that use case as well.